Hello everyone, and welcome to week 12 of Introduction to Sociology. Today we're going to be covering chapter 16 on education. Some of the issues we're going to be looking at, we'll be looking at the sociological perspectives on education, examining schools as formal organizations, and we'll take a look at social policy and education, taking a look at charter schools. Some of the questions we're going to be trying to answer today: do public schools offer everyone a way up the socioeconomic ladder, or do they reinforce divisions among social classes? The perspectives will have very different things to say on that question. We'll examine the idea of the hidden curriculum and what it means in U.S. schools. And we'll take a look at what sociologists have learned about the latest trends in education. So, education is the social institution that formally socializes members of society, teaches them appropriate skills, values, beliefs, and behaviors. Schooling is the formalized process of education. We receive education in a myriad of settings in social institutions. For example, early socialization is done by family. We do socialization in the context of religion, work, in the economy. We learn appropriate behaviors for those types of things as well. So, education is a social institution responsible for socialization, teaching appropriate values, behaviors, beliefs, and attitudes, as well as appropriate skills. And then schooling is the formal process of that. Throughout the world, as it says, education has become a vast and complex social institution that prepares citizens for roles demanded by other social institutions. In a couple of the institutions that you can think of where you would have to have education before you could work within them, of course, would be education itself, formalized schooling, but also politics. In the economy, where you receive specific training for jobs. Religion, a lot of education with regards to religion takes place in what would be referred to as seminary or theological studies schools. When we think about the ideas of higher education completion rates, higher education, of course, post-secondary education is the other way to think of that. Primary education is really kindergarten through 8th grade. Secondary education is high school, and then post-secondary education or higher education. If we look at this, we see that the United States is at 40%. Now, you may have heard other figures like 25 to 30% quoted maybe in the news or in other media. That represents the number of people under age 26 that have a bachelor's degree. This here looks at everybody in society. So this is for adults aged 25 to 64. A lot of people have been going to school later in their lives in U.S. society, kind of since the success of the equal rights movement in letting women get out of the home and enter the economy. If we think about associate's degrees, because this is bachelor's degrees and above, associate's degrees, then 25, 26 and under, the United States is at about 40%. So, from the functionalist view, education as a social institution provides functions to society. One of the manifest functions is transmission of knowledge, both specific knowledge for a particular job, but also general knowledge that productive citizens of U.S. society are expected to understand. So we talk about transmitting culture, we learn our history, we learn the language, we learn important behaviors within our culture, existing beliefs, norms, and values of the culture. Much of education has shifted to an online format. And from a functional perspective, this is actually a beneficial thing in that the internet allows students to take educational courses in an online setting in which they don't have to physically be located near a college, or with regards to time concerns, they can attend these classes at any time. So it's removing obstacles from the paths of people for acquiring education. So when it says new and potentially revolutionary ways of transmitting culture, when we think of education within the function of education, the internet makes education available to a wider range of people. Transmitting culture, of course, all kinds of cultural products are being now transmitted through the internet. If you think about music, movies, TV, books, all of these have been converted into digital formats that you can access through the internet, ultraviolet, cloud drives, these kind of things. Another manifest function, promoting social and political integration, as far as teaching our form of government, the importance of participating in our form of government, the different political parties, how our system of government works, the importance of civic engagement, being engaged in your local community, the importance of work. Work is central to identity in America. We derive personal status from jobs oftentimes. So the whole social and political integration is just about education promoting good citizens and also promoting regulation of behavior. Overall, this promotes social stability and enables us to kind of function as a society, in that we may have differences politically as far as the way we feel the country should be going, but regardless of political differences in the United States of America, we all tend to be in consensus on the importance of democracy as a process for allowing everybody to participate. The level of participation may vary, and people may have differing opinions on that. But as far as being in consensus with regards to democracy as a process and the best process, we learn this in school. Oftentimes, maintaining social control. It teaches us appropriate behaviors and reinforces those behaviors. If you think about maybe being at work, in a meeting where your manager or supervisor or the owner of the company is trying to impart important information, and you may have a question or want a clarification about something, maybe you've just automatically raised your hand. I've done this myself. I've never had a job where they tell you, if you want to ask a question during this meeting, be sure and raise your hand. You could just say, excuse me, I have a question. But the learned behavior learned in at least 12 years of schooling, if not more, of raising your hand when you want to ask a question carries over into other social settings. Other things that kind of, when we think about maintaining social control, it teaches punctuality, being on time. In fact, in school they have bells to let you know just before class is going to start, and then a bell to let you know when you're late. Discipline, scheduling, responsible work habits, of course, through homework, work done outside of a classroom. This teaches you the importance of being able to work on your own without somebody constantly supervising you. Scheduling, usually sometime in high school, maybe a little before that, students are allowed to participate, middle school, high school. They get to decide to a limited extent what courses they want to take. I remember in high school, it wasn't so much about what courses we were taking, it's about making sure that you were scheduling the same courses with your peer group, but you get to participate in scheduling, and then this teaches you the importance of being able to build a schedule when you get out into society. And then how to negotiate a complex bureaucratic organization. Oftentimes, when we think about a new job and we start a new job, the behaviors we've learned in school translate well into learning our new job and how to navigate the complex bureaucracy as well. Schools can serve as an agent of change. If we think about the civil rights movement and one of the early victories of the civil rights movement, Brown versus the Board of Education, the Supreme Court, landmark Supreme Court decision that ended segregation and ended Jim Crow as legal arrangements in the United States of America. Schools can serve as an agent of change. A political activism is very high on college campuses. A lot of people join social movements when they get to college. Beyond that, of course, if we think about science and technology, innovation oftentimes comes from school. Think about how much the internet has changed our lives. One of the early functions of the internet was to promote academic cooperation between faculty doing research in different geographic schools located in different geographic areas. And then finally, if you think about like all the talk of multiculturalism and diversity, and many colleges have the requirement that you take a class that emphasizes diversity or multiculturalism. Schools serve as a place where you are exposed to different people with different backgrounds, so people can share distinctive beliefs and traditions in school. Of course, conflict views education a little bit differently and looks at the inequality that exists in educational outcomes on the basis of particular statuses. So conflict view takes a very different approach than functionalist view, and the conflict view just says education is another social institution similar to religion, similar to politics, similar to the economy, that maintains social inequality. And even from the pure Marxist view, of course, family is a social institution that maintains inequality. So education is the instrument of elite dominations. Conflict view of education is that it does socialize people, but based on sort of class-based differences, it socializes people into different acceptable behaviors. And the values taught to different students from different class backgrounds are different values. And so it stifles individualism and creativity to promote relatively insignificant change. As we've needed to acquire new skills, school has changed. Handwriting classes, being able to write in cursive in handwriting classes, are falling into decline, but computer skills are increasingly being taught, and keyboarding skills are increasingly being taught as part of an educational curriculum. So it's about teaching the relevant forms of technology. And when I mentioned the class-based differences in values, this is what conflict talks about when it talks about the hidden curriculum. People from the upper class are socialized through education. They are taught to question authority in preparation for their role as future leaders of American society. Middle class students are taught to have expectations of service from social institutions. They're not necessarily taught that they're going to lead American society, but they're taught that institutions like the economy and politics and education provide services that middle-class people take advantage of. And so they're taught to have those expectations. And then all this, remember, is according to conflict perspective. Working-class students are taught to obey authority in preparation for their future role as the people working in the service and manufacturing centers, what manufacturing jobs there are left. So standards of behavior deemed proper by society are taught subtly in schools. And there are researchers who have done research into the idea that they're taught differently. Annette Leroux is a social researcher who looked into class-based differences in child rearing, but education plays into the differences that she was talking about there as well. That's just one researcher I can think of off the top of my head who's looked at socialization differences, and education from the conflict view is responsible for some of those differences. Now, it also looks at this process of credentialism. Now, credentialism is itself a process whereby the minimum credentials required to enter particular fields are increased. And the way you obtain credentials, of course, is through education. The diploma is a credential. It's a positive credential in society, a credential that gives you access to certain fields. For example, to teach in the colleges at college level, the minimum requirement in most academic fields is a master's degree with at least 18 credit hours in the specific discipline. So I had to have a master's degree and 18 credit hours to be able to teach sociology at the college level. The high school level and below, generally you're looking at least a college degree. Certain fields it might be an associate's, others it might be a bachelor's degree. Usually they're looking for a bachelor's or master's degree to teach in high school. Now, this has changed as education has become more formalized through opening formal organizations called schools. Credentialism has increased, and the need for degrees has increased as well. Another field we could look at is computer technology. If you wanted to work in the field of computers in the 80s, you didn't really need a degree, you needed proficiency. And if you could demonstrate proficiency, you could go to work for Bill Gates at Microsoft. It was just a startup company then, of course, but you didn't need to have the credentials. Now, really, most places, even for entry-level, just kind of data entry positions, are going to be looking for, at the minimum, a high school diploma, if not an associate's degree. And we've seen this happen in numerous professional fields. The field of medicine in the 19th century, up through the 19th century, medicine accommodated a wide range of different practices. In the mid-19th century, you saw the founding of the AMA, the American Medical Association, and they began to increase, to kind of regulate, self-regulate, and increase the minimum required credential, which became the medical doctor or doctor of osteopathy degrees. Schools tend to preserve social class inequalities in each new generation. There is a school, it's St. Paul's College Preparatory School. It is a school to which really only the elites in society have access for the most part. And this school, almost all the graduates wind up going to Ivy League schools. It's a private academy that has a fairly steep tuition attached to it. So you couldn't just go there a school voucher program. You would need a lot more money than that. It's comparable to a lot of private college tuitions, in that it can, I believe, like it runs $25,000 to $30,000 a year for tuition at this private academy. And so Seamus Khan is a researcher who has taken a look at St. Paul's and how that translates into access in Harvard, access in Yale, Princeton, other Ivy League institutions. And he's kind of looking at it being more the social class of the family that gains you access to St. Paul's, that then gains access to Harvard and other institutions like that. But he also says that there are people who get scholarships to go to Harvard and people who go to Harvard that come out of different backgrounds. So he says that while the conflict view does look at, St. Paul's kind of making it easier for mediocre students from upper class families to gain access to elite educational institutions, it's not the only way that does. And so when we talk about preserving social class inequalities in each new generation, Seamus Khan said what this does is it converts birthright into credential. So it's not so much that these people would not be successful if they didn't go to St. Paul's and then go to Ivy League institutions. It's that St. Paul's provides, and these Ivy League institutions provide the credentials so that we can look at them and say, well, they did go to Harvard and they did graduate from Harvard, so we can see that it's not just family connections getting them to that level. What Seamus Khan would say is education doesn't preserve, it masks the inequalities that exist in generations by providing a route to a higher level credential for social members of the social upper class. Now, within public schools, it's a little bit different story. And most of the focus does look at this practice of tracking. Tracking in public schools is ideally the practice of looking at a student's skills and aptitudes and future goals and placing them into an academic track that will take them towards that goal. Somebody who is fascinated by internal combustion engines and wants to become a mechanic will be guided towards classes that will facilitate that. However, the other criteria that conflict view focuses on is really kind of looking at how if you get labeled a troublemaker, that will put you on a lower achieving academic track. If you come from a working class background, you may be advised to consider a vocational rather than academic or university track in education. And the correspondence principle is that specific idea of teaching values and behaviors to students on the basis of social class. The idea that we teach upper class students to question authority, we teach middle class students to have expectations of service from authority figures in social institutions like police and the criminal justice and politics and etc. And working class and lower class individuals are taught to obey authority figures. So this is how it perpetuates those social class divisions. The feminist view, of course, will focus on the idea of gender inequality. We find the stereotypes in textbooks. If we think about like the reading primers, the old ones, the Dick and Jane primers, where we would see Dick doing things with Dad that would prepare him to go out and get a job, and Jane doing things with Mom that would prepare her for a life as a homemaker and child care provider. And this continues on when we think about word problems. Bill is riding on an express train for a conference for work, and then it talks about distances and time and acceleration, but it sets it up that it's Bill who's on the train headed for a conference for work, or Jane needs to cut a recipe in half as a way of setting up a math problem. We see this kind of stuff maybe perpetuated in textbooks as well. Women who pursue education, There's pressure to study traditional women's subjects. In 1940, one of the most, if not the most, popular college degree for women in college to be pursuing was home economics. In fact, my stepmother actually has a bachelor's degree in home economics. Now, she went on to graduate school as one of the top 3 people in her field in the world, and gets invited around the world to speak at conferences on clinical nutrition. But she had that kind of traditional idea that, okay, when we get girls in college, we funnel them into home economics because all they're there to do is kind of meet a husband and learn how to take care of the house. And for women who insisted on learning a profession, well, if they're interested in medicine, they would, instead of being guided towards becoming a doctor, be guided towards becoming a nurse. If they were interested in education, they wouldn't be pushed towards graduate school and becoming a professor at a university. They would be pushed towards elementary education. And so we find this kind of sexism that still exists in education. Now, the idea of telling a college applicant who's female, study home economics because you're just here to meet a husband and learn how to run the house, may have been culturally acceptable in 1940, but in 2015 it's not acceptable. But we still do find these patterns of behavior in which young girls who are interested in math and science are still being diverted away from that, those interests, and told that only boys are really good at math and science. So we still find these kind of problems, and this is what the feminist view would look at. Unequal funding for athletics. Now, when Title IX was passed in 1972, it's Title IX of the Educational Amendment Act. Title IX said that women in public schools must be offered an equal number of athletic opportunities as men. They didn't say it had to be the same sport, but if there are 10 men's teams throughout the year, the academic year, then there have to be 10 women's teams as well at both high school and college level. Despite the fact that there may be an equal number of athletic opportunities for men and women at the University of Notre Dame, the men's football team, the men's basketball team, the men's baseball team get far more funding than any of the other sports, and probably those 3 combined exceed the funding for all women's sporting events, athletic teams. So unequal funding is another thing they'd focus on. Employment bias. When we think about education, there is employment bias. We can point to some facts and figures. Women tend to be overwhelmingly the teachers. They're the largest group of or the larger gendered teachers in elementary school, yet we still see that a majority of school principals at the elementary level are men. So that's one of the things that feminism kind of looks at with regards to education. Right now, women are actually graduating at greater rates, or from college at greater rates than men are. Women are getting more degrees, and women are getting more graduate degrees as well than men are. So women have made strides in continuing education, which is another way of referring to post-secondary or higher education. Women are getting degrees awarded at greater rates. Women are actually having an easier time finding employment in the economy than men are right now. Some of that has to do with gendered jobs, though, from the feminist perspective, in that there's a huge demand for nurses right now, and nursing is still a field that is dominated by women. 95% of the nurses probably in our nation are women. So, they're graduating at greater rates, but and finding jobs at greater rates, but there is still the problem of the pay gap. Feminists want to focus on that, the fact that the Fair Pay Act failed again to pass in Congress. Okay, finally we get to the interactionist view here. And what we have here is the labeling approach that was kind of developed by Howard Becker, but the big idea here is the self-fulfilling prophecy or teacher expectancy effect. They're similar terms, although the self-fulfilling prophecy can exist outside of education. But the teacher expectancy effect. Essentially, the teacher's expectations of students have an impact on the outcomes that the students experience. For example, if in a classroom where there's a teacher that's teaching science, and this teacher happens to believe that males are better at math and science, even if that belief is never openly expressed in the classroom, if the teacher only calls on male students when they ask questions and say, okay, everybody raise your hands, who's got the answer to this question? And they call on Billy, and they call on Robbie, and they call on John, and they call on Tommy, but they never call on Jane, or they never call on Susan, or they never call on Jennifer, or they never call on anybody that's female. Eventually, that expectation is communicated to the females in the class that you're just not good at math and science, and so the effort drops, their belief in themselves and their ability drops, and eventually what you have is the self-fulfilling prophecy, where if you don't expect certain students to succeed, they will live down to your expectations. And so this is something that educators have to be very careful when they're in the classroom and when they're discussing things. They need to be sure that they're trying to communicate that every student can be successful in the classroom. When that happens, we have great outcomes in education. When it doesn't happen, we don't have outcomes that are quite as great. So, okay, if we look here, these are annual median earnings by educational level. So this is just kind of breaking down. You may have heard that there are people that are graduating with college degrees that cannot find jobs, and that they're saddled with all this student debt. This is true, but it's true for a minority of students. When we look at unemployment rates are almost 2% lower for people who have an associate's degree or higher. So people with degrees can find jobs easier, and the unemployment rate is substantially lower for people who have college degrees. Additionally, if we look at median earnings here, and when we talk about median earnings, this is the most common earning wage for people with this particular educational level. It's not an average, it's kind of the middle, where the actual middle falls. So no high school degree, we see their kind of typical service sector entry-level position at McDonald's and retail right there. High school graduate or GED is slightly higher. A lot of times we'll see these people in low-level supervisory positions. Some college increases even a little bit more. If you have an associate's degree, that's about $9,000 more on average than a bachelor's degree, or than a high school graduate degree, I'm sorry. A bachelor's degree takes it up. And then you can see master's, doctorate. Professional degree are doctorates, but they include some master's degrees. Professional degrees are degrees in architecture, degrees in medicine, law degrees, and MBAs, which is the Master of Business. There's not really a doctorate of business, so that's kind of the highest degree there. So those are professional degrees. Doctoral degrees really don't include the MD in there, or the DO, Doctor of Osteopathy. Doctoral degrees are the PhD, the Psych D, those type of professional of doctoral degrees that are the non-professional. So we look here, foreign students that are traveling outside. we see that we have a large number of immigrant students here, more students coming into the U.S. than going out. But we do have study abroad. In fact, at Ivy Tech, if you're interested, there is the option of traveling abroad for a summer semester and doing a study abroad program in the summer. Depending on which campus you're at, I don't believe all campuses are offering that, but I know that it's a growing program here at Ivy Tech, studying abroad. My youngest brother actually spent 2 years over in Germany at the University of Constance during his bachelor's degree. And then he's gone back for a master's degree, but who knows? He'll probably wind up living there one day. Anyway, but you see we have a large number of students coming into the U.S. as well. China, India, and South Korea send substantial numbers of students to the U.S., and then we see coming from other areas as well. Tuition costs have gone up substantially. This is a little bit out of date here. It just shows you how much they've gone up. Right now, I think the average for community colleges has gone up to the point where it's about $1,000 more than it was there. It's really climbed substantially in the last 6 or so years. And very private institutions are substantially higher than that. I know the tuition at Notre Dame is about $36,000 a year, and the tuition at Ivy League schools can be $45,000 or more, $45,000 a year or more. So this is just a quick summation looking at the sociological perspectives on education. You will find this table in your textbook if you'd like to take a closer look at it, but it's really the stuff that we've discussed. Okay, Google University, well, the idea here is kind of electronic forms of education. This course that you're taking right now, you had to purchase a textbook. It has just been redesigned and will be rolling out where the textbook is an e-textbook that's included in the cost of the tuition. But, you know, some people actually prefer having a book in their hands, a magazine in their hands. Some people prefer things like the Kindle or the Nook, which are e-readers where you have access to an electronic version of the book through an online format. We can think about also what are referred to as MOOCs, the massive open online classes or courses. And these are being offered, and people who successfully complete these can actually get a college credit. And the MOOCs don't cost anything to join. It's all open education resource type stuff. If you think about participation in social movements and social causes, we're now seeing a lot of those that are started on the internet and then kind of progress through the internet, getting members to sign petitions and join causes and maybe even donate money through email and through online sites like Facebook, social network sites. So if you participate in social or political causes or volunteer while on campus, oftentimes you can do some of this work through the internet. Max Weber, of course, was a sociologist who his big thing was about Verstehen. If you remember all the way back to chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4 when we were setting the stage for a lot of the discussions of social institutions. But he also, Verstehen, of course, is understanding or comprehension, and because he believes that people are expressing things when they act, the important thing to do is understand what they're trying to express while they're acting. Weber also had his 6 characteristics of a bureaucracy. He created an ideal type of bureaucratic structure that he used to evaluate real bureaucracies. And these 6 characterizations that we find in a school, the one that's missing from this is written communication. That was another one of the characteristics that Weber had. He had division of labor, hierarchy of authority, written rules and regulation, impersonality, employment based on technical qualifications, and written rules or written communication. With Ivy Tech, it tends to be email. Think about how everything is communicated through email. And you're told throughout Ivy Tech, throughout your Ivy Tech experience, you need to be checking your email every 2 or 3 days. Because email is how things get communicated. So written communication was the 6th characteristic of the bureaucracy. But the division of labor, even in schools we see this, the growth of an administrative bureaucracy. It's not just about the faculty and the teachers anymore. There's a big bureaucratic part to education as well, a hierarchy of authority that exists. I'm the program chair of the social sciences at my campus. So I supervise all the social sciences, psychology, economics, political science, sociology, anthropology. I supervise all those adjuncts and faculty at my campus. I answer to the department chair who's over everybody in our region, and we have 4 campuses. Then she answers to the dean of the University and Transfer Division, and he answers to the vice chancellor of academic affairs in our region. And she answers to the chancellor in our region, who answers to the president, with some vice presidents, and provost is in there as well. But there's a hierarchy that goes all the way up to our president, Tom Snyder. Written rules and regulations. There's the student handbook. There's a handbook for faculty and staff as well. The Academic Standards Operation Manual is what I have to refer to when I have a question about my job. So formal written rules and regulations. Impersonality. Think about when you go into student affairs. What's the first thing they ask you for? Your C number. It's very efficient, but it does create that impersonal effect. That is actually what Max Weber believes leads to alienation in society, is the impersonal nature of dealing with all the bureaucratic structures that exist in politics, in education, in the economy. And finally, employment based on technical qualifications. I outlined a little bit of that, like you actually have to have the skill and ability to do what you're hired to do, and that's demonstrated through credentials you acquire, like graduate level degree in my case. So, teachers. There's a program called Teach for America, which hires new college graduates to go around the country, and if they teach for 2 years, they'll pay off a good chunk of your student loans. This is because there's a demand for teachers. There's a shortage of teachers. Close to 500,000 teaching jobs are unstaffed. This is because teachers undergo many stresses. One of the things is low income. Another thing is the standardized testing, which then is used as a rubric to measure the effectiveness of teachers. So we lose between 1/4 and 1/3 of new teachers, and this is really focusing on the K through 12 here. 1/4 and 1/3 of new teachers quit within their first 3 years. In the year 2010, less than 4% of first-year college students were interested in elementary education, and 3.9, still less than 4%, so less than 8% of first-year college students interested in education as a career path. In colleges, there are all different student subcultures. The academic subculture, the collegiate subculture, vocational subculture, and then the nonconformist subculture. Maybe you've heard, like, or seen the trope, which is like kind of the idea that college students in their first year tend to reinvent themselves. Freshman college students are in a process of reinventing themselves. Some of that has to do with which subculture they affiliate with in college. Is it the academic subculture? Well, that's the one that's focusing on doing well in classes. It's the collegiate subculture. Part of that may be participation in sports. Part of that may be participation in the Greek system, the fraternities and sororities. The vocational subculture, the kind of division that you may see exist at Ivy Tech, where you've got students who are taking a lot of gen ed courses to get the general studies or liberal arts degree to transfer on. That would be in the academic subculture. The vocational subculture are the students that are doing the applied science degrees, maybe in the School of Design and Technology or Criminal Justice, where they're kind of doing the job, doing the associate's degree to get right out into the workforce. You see within the academic subculture, there's another division that exists between the theoretical and the applied within like scientific fields. If you're interested in studying, like, say, social theory, sociological theory in Arizona, you would better be served by going to the University of Arizona and going to their School of Social and Behavioral Sciences, because they focus a lot on sociological theory there. If you're interested in application, you should probably go to ASU, because the department there focuses more on application of social theory, kind of what they call the applied approach. And then the nonconformist subculture, these are the various kind of subcultures, alternative music, that you see existing, around alternative music, alternative lifestyle. So when they talk about students reinventing themselves, what they're doing is they're choosing the subculture with which they want to affiliate. An increasing phenomenon right now is homeschooling as well. This is where children are educated in the home and parents are the ones doing the educating. Children do have to pass tests that are administered by government officials. So there is some oversight. In general, the homeschooling movement produces educational outcomes that are better for children, but sometimes children are not socialized as effectively. That's one kind of critique of it. So some theorists cite lack of social involvement as a problem, but homeschooled children do score higher on tests. They have higher educational outcomes. In 1970, this was a very, very small number, but it's really grown to the point where in 2010 there were roughly 1.5 million children being schooled at home. For children that have certain types of learning disabilities, this can actually be better for them. If they suffer from ADHD, they can get their education in shorter installments, working around perhaps a parent's schedule. As I said, there is some oversight, but still quality control is an issue. Homeschooled children get admitted to colleges at slightly higher rates, which is a switch over, because it used to be that colleges did not want children who were homeschooled. At one point in time, the military was refraining from taking children from alternative educational environments, which would include a lot of charter schools, magnet schools, and homeschooling. I don't think that's an issue as much anymore, but homeschooling may facilitate certain children in achieving certain goals, but it may also make certain goals harder for children to achieve. Okay, Title IX is another issue. We discussed this a little bit. I don't know if you had any experiences with Title IX in high school. At Ivy Tech, we're working on developing some athletics programs, but right now we don't really have any. And then kind of looking at the functionalist perspective on this, is women participating in sports creating social stability, or is it creating social instability? And then from the conflict and feminist perspective, looking at the differences in perception, and also a little bit from the interactionist perspective and that the meanings attached to behavior. How does Title IX affect the way students and public view gender roles? Are the sports that men and women are participating in reflecting traditional gender roles, or do we see women beginning to participate, men and women beginning to participate in the same sports? See here, Illinois, the average is actually very high for teachers. In Illinois, it's roughly $60,000 a year. That's for kind of the average of K through 12 teachers. We do see that there are some areas where teachers make a pretty good living. There are some states still where teachers are not making as much as they are in other states. A lot of that will have to do with union presence, where you see higher pay. Teachers' unions probably have a much stronger presence. Only about 12% of the labor force in U.S. society is represented by unions, but within teachers, 40 to 43% of teachers are represented by unions. So there's a much higher union presence in education as a field than there is in the U.S. economy as a whole. And in states where you see higher salaries, that's where you will probably see a stronger union presence. When we think about college campuses, looking at how they've changed, we have seen an increase in the number of minority students attending. The projection for 2019, 4 years from now, is expected to be roughly the same percentage as the groups represent in U.S. society. Although it's actually slightly lower for Hispanics and slightly higher for African Americans. So, thinking about charter schools, this was one of the ways in which education as an institution responded to the pressure from politics to guarantee that students would learn kind of the basics, Common Core, this kind of thing. And charter schools developed as a response to this as a way to try and see if there were better ways to meet the directives of No Child Left Behind. There's roughly 5,000 charter schools in U.S. society. Some of the ones that have successful outcomes are the KIPP Academy, the Harlem Success Academy in Upper Harlem in New York, where 97% of the students are graduating, and of those students who graduate, 96% of them are ready for freshman level college courses. But charter schools are not all high-performing schools. Only about a fifth of them are having those kind of outcomes. So they're in kind of the same boat as public schools, because about a fifth of public schools have high-level outcomes, high-level for their students. Charter schools compete with public schools. There is a huge demand for enrollment sometimes at charter schools, and they'll have to use a lottery for admission. Because where they have more applicants than there are seats, they have to select in a random fashion. So functionalists look at the emergence of charter schools as just another way in which the needs of more students are being met. So they actually are beneficial. Charter schools are financed through taxes, so they are publicly financed. But in general, charter schools have emerged as non-unionized workplaces. Most of them are not unionized. There has been some research done, but the research is inconclusive on the benefits of charter schools. So when we think about how can this affect policy, really school policy is kind of determined at the local level. And charter schools are one way in which parents and educators have kind of come together. If we think about the Harlem Success Academy, Jeffrey Canada was the person who held meetings in Upper Harlem and got a lot of the parents behind this idea of creating a charter school in Harlem. And once the parents were behind it, then they kind of put pressure on the local politicians, city council, and things like that to provide funding for it. So this is really an example of that kind of policy being driven at the local level. But there are other options available. Homeschooling. A lot of districts have school vouchers, which we covered before, allowing the parents to either apply the voucher towards private school tuition or the voucher to take the funds that would go to their child to another school district. So that's our look at education. Does anybody have any questions at this point in time? If not, I have turned your microphones on, so if you do have questions, feel free to ask. If not, that's it for this week, and we'll be doing this at the same time next week. It'll be 1:30 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I say Central first because I'm actually located in that little portion of Indiana where I'm on Central Time. So have a good week, and we will see everybody next Monday.